From your favorite podcatchers and our YouTube channel featuring scenic videos, this is Kaijuvision Radio, Episode 33, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Hello, G-fans and kaiju lovers, and welcome to Kaijuvision Radio, a podcast about the appreciation of giant monster movies
and discovering their historical and cultural value.
I'm Nathan Marchand.
And I'm Brian Scherschel.
And this week, we're about halfway through the Millennium series, and we're getting back to Masaki Tezuka, who is bringing us his second entry in the Millennium series. This time, it's Godzilla against Mechagodzilla from 2002.
Yes, this is the second movie of what I would call the Tezuka Trilogy. We're probably going to differ on this one a little bit, opinion-wise.
Yeah, I have opinions. Very strong opinions on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to be the nice guy to this because I like these Tezuka movies overall. So we'll get into this. Our related topics will be women in the Godzilla movies and the firing of Makiko Tanaka.
But before we get to all of that, it's time for that film description. Take it away, Brian. You're listening to Kaijuvision Radio.
Godzilla is a force of nature. He is a member of the same species as the creature that ravaged Tokyo in 1954. He attacks Japan with no apparent motivation, although it's postulated that he is attracted by Kiryu. Mechagodzilla, or Kiryu, or MFS3, is an advanced cyborg created and controlled by the Japanese Xenomorph Self-Defense Force, or JXSDF. It has biological components derived from the DNA of the original Godzilla. Lieutenant Akane Yoshiro is a self-loathing and guilt-ridden JXSDF pilot recruited as part of the Kiryu Squadron, despite getting her entire team killed by Godzilla. Tokumitsu Yuhara, a compassionate biologist, helps design Kiryu after attracting the JXSDF's attention with his impressive cybernetics work. His daughter, Sara Yuhara, is a sensitive and lonely girl who forms a friendship with Akane due to their similarities. Hayato Igarashi is the firm but understanding Prime Minister of Japan who initiated the Kiryu program as Minister of Science and Technology. Second Lieutenant Susumu Hayama, a distrustful and angry JXSDF officer, joins the Kiryu Squadron but frequently berates Akane for getting her team killed. The kaiju and human plotlines are mostly unified. The characters have minor personal subplots connected to the monsters. Otherwise, they battle, study, and/or control the kaiju. Godzilla is the problem throughout the film, although Kiryu becomes one briefly. The JSDF frequently attacks Godzilla with tanks, fighter jets, maser cannons, and rockets, all of which fail to stop him. With 3 AC-3 White Herons for support, Kiryu battles Godzilla but goes berserk when it hears him roar. Godzilla retreats, and after destroying 1 White Heron and attacking the city for an hour, it shuts down after exhausting his power. It's reprogrammed to prevent this from happening again. The problem is solved when Kiryu battles Godzilla a second time. Akane pilots Kiryu and flies Godzilla out to sea, crashing into the ocean and shooting him point blank with the Absolute Zero cannon. The wounded Godzilla breaks free from the ice and retreats. The script by Wataru Mimura is more complex than previous Millennium series films, but still simpler than most Heisei Godzilla films. The cast is larger and the story has more subplots. With a budget of 1 billion yen, roughly $8.5 million, special effects were directed by Yuichi Kikuchi, who employed less CGI and more practical effects than in previous Millennium series films. CGI was mostly limited to missiles and some shots of Kiryu flying, although it was also employed to recreate the original Godzilla's death scene from the 1954 classic. Tsutomu Tom Kitagawa once again played Godzilla, wearing a new suit that resembled the previous one he wore, though with a few changes. The new Mechagodzilla was given a sleek design that integrated elements from both the Showa and Heisei versions. Overall, the miniature work is solid. The film has a light tone, but the characters deal with serious issues that add gravity to the story. Despite heavy science fiction trappings, the implied supernatural elements make it a fantasy film. Creating the new Mechagodzilla that included biological components cloned from the original Godzilla was an intriguing idea that helped set it apart from the Mecha Kaiju's previous incarnations. Unfortunately, this concept goes largely unexplored and Mechagodzilla becomes just another robot. The film reinforces the style of 1974's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla by featuring Godzilla's robot double as his foe. It also reinforces the style of Godzilla vs. Megaguirus with his female protagonist, similar story, and military focus. After the radically experimental GMK, Toho decided to return to form by having director Masaki Tezuka and his creative team helm the next G film. They revived another classic Godzilla foe in the hopes of appealing to longtime kaiju fans. It was intended to be a safe film that would turn a guaranteed profit. The film was released in Japan December 13, 2002, earning 1.91 billion yen, about $16 million, and selling 1.7 million tickets. This made it the second highest grossing film in the Millennium series. It was released on DVD in the United States by TriStar in 2004 and on Blu-ray in 2014. It is generally liked by fans. There are multiple forces at play. The Anti-Megalosaurus Force, or AMF, is a division of the JSDF formed to combat kaiju. This is later replaced by the JXSDF. Kiryu's biotechnology infuses it with the original Godzilla's soul, which makes it temporarily defy its creators. This prompts Sara to say that Kiryu is a living being with a right to life while everyone else sees it as just a malfunctioning weapon. Akane is plagued by survivor's guilt after getting her teammates killed by Godzilla. Her mistake is sometimes criticized by her fellow soldiers. Sara is sensitive to matters of life and death after losing her pregnant mother at age 4. Self-worth is the most prominent theme, as seen in Akane's character arc. Through her friendship with Sara, she learns her life is meaningful, which compels her to fight harder against Godzilla. Her squad mates, including Hayama, come to respect her as she proves her competence. In turn, Sara comes to grips with her grief and loneliness thanks to Akane. There's an understated sense that living beings shouldn't be exploited as weapons. This concludes part 1 of the podcast. You're listening to Kaijuvision Radio.
Part 2 of the podcast will be our opinion and discussion of the film we're covering this week. For me, I wish I liked it more. What about you, Brian?
I actually do like it for the vast majority part of it. Yeah, I'm good with this.
I know some fans argue that Tezuka's movies got better as they went, but honestly, I still think Mechagodzilla is better overall. I might be in the minority on that.
I might agree with you, though, but I still really like this. It seems to have a nice sense, it's a clear sense of purpose. I also like the lead actress, and so...
Yeah, she's wonderful.
There are a lot of pluses in this movie. So let's start with things that we like. In general, I like the atmosphere that this movie has. It just seems like a movie. It has things in it that are cinematic. It creates moments for the audience to reflect and feel something. And at the same time, we have some pretty awesome battles. I think there's something in it for everybody. I feel like this is a movie that you can tell that a Godzilla fan made it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's something as a fan, I really appreciate it. But I had the same reaction to Megaguirus as well. All these Tezuka movies, you can tell that a fan made these and that he understood what the fans wanted and understands in general what people like about the Godzilla movies. It's not too simple. I view it as focused.
When I was watching it, I felt like it was a little bit more complex compared to a lot of the previous Millennium movies. It's not Heisei level complex, but it's still more complex, I think. Yeah, there's a lot of things thrown in here. A lot of different ideas, because you got character stuff going on, and you have several different ideas that are being thrown in here.
Having met Michiru Oshima myself at G-Fest, I'm going to be a little biased here, but as a music person, I absolutely love the soundtrack to this movie.
Yeah, the soundtrack is fantastic. It could be argued that Oshima gets better with every movie that she does.
This music enhances the movie so much.
It really does.
Especially during our tender moments with Akane and Sara. Those moments, that music is just perfect. It's cinematic, it's appropriate, it gets us into the mood.
And her Godzilla theme is still epic.
Yeah, the drums and everything.
Oh, yeah. I love her Godzilla theme.
And the trumpet fanfare, it all sounds very impressive, extremely appropriate, especially the Akane theme, with the trumpet. Mm-hmm. Going nice and high on the trumpet. It's It's a 21:14 into the movie. And if you have the soundtrack, which I do, you can...
Is that the one you had signed by her?
I believe so, yeah. And there are 2 tracks on there that contain the Akane's theme. But it's just amazing.
One of the things that's really cool is, I think I remember hearing her talk about this at G-Fest, is we talked about her Godzilla theme when you said that she didn't listen to any of the previous music because she didn't want to be colored by it. But the direction she was given, if I remember correctly, for making this Godzilla theme was she was just told, make it sound big. Because it's for Godzilla. She just make it sound big. And she definitely succeeded at that.
Definitely. Also without overdoing it.
Yes.
Even the little music when the kids are walking down the street.
Yeah, like they just got off of school.
And then there's a little flute going. And has any music like that ever been in a Godzilla movie?
I can't think of any. Not like that anyway.
Yeah, like somebody actually wrote a track just for a tiny little scene like that. And it's just little strings and flute going. And I thought, wow, this is nice. They made a whole little selection of music for this little... They didn't have to have that in there.
No.
in the movie at all, that scene. But it kind of normalizes the movie and the story to have something like that, because you may as well have a narrator being like, and one average day.
And this really illustrates the importance of soundtracks in films, especially since I know a lot of people in the last 5 years in particular, at least with American films, have been complaining that movie soundtracks have not really been up to snuff for a while. So the fact that she's able to make such memorable soundtracks for these films is a great achievement.
Besides Akane's theme, I really love the Akane character, and I love Yukimo Shaku as her. Her character desires redemption more than she desires revenge.
Which is a nice difference.
That might be part of it.
And I'm glad that was the angle that they took, because I have to admit, at the start, because it's been before I watched this for the podcast, it had been a while since I had seen this one. And I was a little bit concerned that it was going to be a rehash of Mechagodzilla, because it starts off a lot like Mechagodzilla. But thankfully, they go off in a different direction with her, where it's not about revenge. As you said, it's about redemption.
Even though in Mechagodzilla, that character, she screws up too and gets people killed, but she blames it on Godzilla.
Yeah.
It's just that dark Godzilla. And in this movie, she doesn't blame it all on Godzilla.
And she takes it on herself.
she accepts responsibility, and so it doesn't become a revenge story. Her character also functions as a sort of emotional pick-me-up. By the time you get to the end of her character arc at the end of the movie, you sort of feel uplifted a little bit by her experience. Mm-hmm. And sort of says, she did it, I can do it too. Whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't know, as hackneyed as that sounds, I feel optimistic at the end of the movie.
I think the little girl certainly felt like that.
The audience should feel optimistic at the end. It ends on a nice high note. The first time I saw this, I was happy at the end. I was like, yeah, I really like this. Good. Mm-hmm. We get this very nice, wonderful flashback scene. The scene with Kumi Mizuno and Akira Nakao as Prime Minister and Minister of Science and Technology at the time. And then he becomes Prime Minister later. But
another Millennium trademark, bringing back one of the Showa era actors.
Yes, and she's awesome as the Prime Minister in this. But this flashback scene, though, is great. It shows clips from the previous monster attacks, and it's almost like saying explicitly, we don't care about all of these other movies in a continuity way. We're just hearkening back to other monster attacks that have occurred, and we get to pick which ones. Because that way we don't have to put all of the monsters into it and make it 10 minutes long.
Yeah, they selected 3 Showa era films. It was the original Godzilla, it was the original Mothra, and War of the Gargantuas.
Which Kumi Mizuno was in. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense for her to be recalling some of those things. But It's a very effective scene. It sets up a lot of things.
It's almost like Tezuka is trying to make a surrogate Showa era film.
Yeah. The purpose of this flashback scene is to say about how vulnerable Japan is. They could be annihilated by Godzilla and have no way to defend themselves. It is a good way to get across the point about their helplessness. Japan at this point also had the JSDF, and while the JSDF does have power, in reality, Japan cannot defend itself with just that, including their ability to be under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, which is another method of defense. This taps into Japan's situation, and it creates a need to create Mechagodzilla in the first place, rather than just, oh, we invented this at the very beginning of the movie, like our previous one in 1993. With this, they hadn't built it yet. And so then they present the actual need for why to invent Kiryu. But he's also a giant super weapon. So that would be fulfilling the need for Japan to get enough firepower for defense. But this, as you can see in the movie, caused controversy as far as budget and as far as, does this violate our Constitution?
Which I really appreciated seeing.
Yeah, they actually explicitly say, is this the rearmament of Japan?
Uh-huh.
In that great scene where they have all the reporters and press all around her and they're like jostling her practically as she's trying to get down the stairs. You need scenes like this in Godzilla movies. Just like in GMK, for instance, when they had the big press conferences about, oh, here's Godzilla. You want to have scenes like this in Godzilla. They're so appropriate. And it presents us with some sort of meat to the story. There's some reference to current events. And it all meshes together very well.
One of the things I really enjoy in this movie is, you mentioned Tezuka is obviously a fanboy, and you can see it throughout this movie. There are lots of homages and callbacks to the Showa era films. We've mentioned a few of them already, but you have stuff like they recreate Godzilla's death scene from the 1954 film. They use CGI to do it, which is, I will admit, is a little bit odd at first, but you get used to it. But I think one of my favorite homages is about 5 minutes in when they have the Maser attack, which seemed like Tezuka was trying very hard to recreate the Maser attack that was in War of the Gargantuas, and then it gets recycled a whole bunch as stock footage in some of the 70s Godzilla movies. And speaking of Masers, he brings back a lot of the Showa era military tech in this one too. It's a little bit more fantastical. We have the Maser cannons again, most notably. The technology used in Mechagodzilla is certainly more advanced than anything we've seen in most of these previous movies, and we don't have any explanation about where this technology comes from other than, oh, it's just stuff that we have. It's not like,
thank goodness.
Yeah, it's not like the 90s version where they made it using salvaged future tech.
Or take a whole scene describing it. But
yeah.
There are a couple scenes about the technology where it's demonstrated, and the technology demonstration scenes in this are good too. It gets the point across and has that whole room full of scientists and experts, and they all stand up and get really shocked at the absolute zero cannon and how powerful it is.
That's a great weapon. It's not black hole gun ridiculous, but it's kind of up there, but I really like it.
The guy that invented the absolute zero gun, he looks totally perfect for the part. He's great.
Yeah.
Our second prime minister, played by Akira Nakao, Igarashi is really good. He was also in Mechagodzilla 2.
I thought he looked familiar.
Yes, and then he was also in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. It establishes a nice little bit of continuity with the Showa series, sort of not really explicitly having all this stuff in there, but just bringing back that kind of a world as opposed to just science everything. Did you notice that Shin Takuma was back? He's the majority of the comic relief. Sara's dad.
Ah, yes, that guy.
And he was in Godzilla 1985.
Ah.
Also, the little girl's dad from Godzilla 2000, he was the guy that was picking up cans at the beginning of the movie. And I recognized him.
Yeah, I did too. Speaking of the dad in Godzilla 2000, we have another little girl in this Godzilla movie, and thankfully she is not weird.
Yes, we don't have a creepy little girl this time. She's a little affected.
Yeah, who's
no.
we don't have a little girl who's way too smart for her age and acting like an adult when she shouldn't be.
And constantly putting herself in danger.
Yeah. But I like her in this one. It's not often you find good child actors, and she's actually pretty decent in this.
This is literally the only thing that she's been in.
Oh, it is?
Uh-huh.
Same thing with the girl from 2000. That's about the only thing she was ever in, too. The scene you were talking about when we were talking about the soundtrack with the kids walking home from school, I love that scene because it's a wonderful thing with all these kids that are just interacting, and it's like Sarah gets to stand there and say, "Oh yeah, this is where I live. I live on this base. See, this is really cool." And she just walks up to the guard, and he says hi to her, and she just walks right in.
It helps to establish that there are normal people in the movie, which sometimes you should probably try to do that. And the point is that the extraordinary thing is that that her father is working on Kiryu. And so that's the extraordinary thing. The ordinary thing is what? All the other kids. At least in this movie, they're not talking about how there's a part of Godzilla in all of us. or getting all creepy by saying, "Oh, well, we need to be advocates for him," and all this. His life's very important. But whose life is important, though? Kiryu's.
Yeah, and she becomes a huge advocate for it.
Kiryu's right to
whatever you want to call
Kiryu's
it. Yeah.
right to exist.
Yeah,
etc. Because it has a soul,
and that
in a very rough way of.
Yeah, and that plays into her struggle because she's still grieving the loss of her mother.
Mm-hmm.
She has a hard time dealing with matters of life and death because of that, and that's why she carries that little plant with her all the time. It's almost like a security blanket, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah,
but it also works, I think, as a bit of a metaphor for Akane, because they talk about how the plant that she has always recoils whenever somebody tries to touch it.
Yeah,
and I think that it not only works for Akane, it works for Sarah as well.
Yep.
So it's a nice visual metaphor without it being hammered into us like it would be in a Heisei movie.
Or just, if it was a Heisei movie, it'd just be mentioned with like 50 other things that we'd have to wade through in order to get to the actual message. Which, this movie's not simple. It's just nice and focused.
Yeah.
The story's easy to understand. It's not like... I don't feel like this movie's treating us like we're stupid, though.
No. But I do have one question related to her. Do you think it was a little bit of a stretch that she would be, even if her dad is working at this base, that she would be led into their little control room where the robot and such is? I mean, it's not Gamera, old school Gamera level ridiculous, but like, because with the military consulting with the kids or whatever, but still she's allowed in there.
I don't know. It didn't really affect me much from that direction. Right after the titles, we get our victim scene.
Yes.
Very early on. It's our earliest victim scene ever. It gets us some gravity right at the beginning. The human toll of Godzilla's actions. And therefore working also to create more of a need for Kiryu to exist. So again, that plays a story function by having that scene early on. Because you want the whole messages, you want to avoid having this happen over and over again. And so you want to put a stop to the problem. And so it creates a nice motivation. I really like how the suits in this movie look. How they're designed with Kiryu as well as Godzilla.
I was about to bring that up, actually. This is my favorite Mechagodzilla design. It's not my favorite Mechagodzilla overall, but it's my favorite design.
In my opinion, it's about the Showa version design, maybe as much as this. It's a really tough call. I like them both a lot.
The thing I like about this one is that it includes elements of both the Showa and the Heisei design. So it's a little bit more streamlined and a little less angular compared to the other two, which is why I like it. It's kind of a best of both worlds.
Yeah, it is. But Godzilla's suit is also great. The Godzilla suit's great. I like how it looks. The material it's made of, it looks really convincing.
Yes, we more or less have the return of the original Millennium suit from the first two movies. It's just that a lot of its characteristics have been scaled down a little bit. The dorsal fins are a little less prominent and such, I think the teeth are a little less crocodile-ish. Mm-hmm. But it still looks very much like that suit, which fits in with most of these Millennium movies. They used a fairly similar design with each one, with the exception of GMK. And as has become tradition with any movie featuring Mechagodzilla, we have that introductory shot of Mechagodzilla where the camera pans up and shows you the entire mech.
Right.
And that scene, I think more than any other one that I've seen in these movies, really feels like Pacific Rim to me.
Low with the Jaegers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Del Toro definitely saw these Millennium movies, and I would almost bet money he was a huge fan of these Tezuka films in particular, especially with this one. Mm-hmm. Also, did you notice during that sequence they had the Star Trek phaser sound effect?
I did not notice that.
Yeah, it was in there. I forget what it was being used for, but it was in there.
Interesting.
I always notice when those sound effects get recycled. I also really like the name Kiryu. They alternate between calling the machine Mechagodzilla or Kiryu. I actually prefer the name Kiryu in this. I looked it up. It actually means metal dragon.
Right, so it actually makes sense. Mm-hmm. But when I first saw it, I didn't really care for it, but now I like the name. It grew on me the more I saw the movie.
It also makes it easier for me to identify which one. I'll just say Kiryu as opposed to Millennium Mechagodzilla or something
Mechagodzilla
like that.
3.
Yeah, or Mechagodzilla 3. Yeah, silly things like that. The climactic monster battle in this also feels more like a Showa film. It's a little more exaggerated, a little bit more sumo.
Physical.
A little more physical.
Yeah, not just beams all the time.
Yeah, even though Mechagodzilla's got a giant futuristic arsenal at his disposal. So I really like that. I especially like how it starts when Kiryu makes his little heroic shoulder tackle.
Yeah.
He just pops right in and just shoves him out of the way. Very, almost a superhero-ish sort of move to make. But then it gets really crazy once Kiryu throws off that jetpack and he's not as encumbered anymore. Then he can really just go crazy.
Yeah, and the punching and everything. It works. It calls back to the Showa era, and it's fun. It's a fun battle to watch, and it's engaging, and it's choreographed well, and there aren't three monsters in it that you have to awkwardly work, between them and stuff. It makes a lot of coherent sense in your mind watching this battle, and the music's fantastic during that too.
And then it ends in great traditional Godzilla fashion with a falling into the ocean moment.
Well, being catapulted or whatever into the ocean. Yeah. We cool Godzilla off in the ocean again in order to end the battle.
Yeah.
And then he's tired and retreats on us. It calls back to all those falling into the ocean times too.
Yeah. Well, so at least it's different. Well, they fall in and freeze.
Yeah. And then this huge tower of ice just pops out of there, which I also like. That looks good, and it's a great way to neutralize Godzilla, at least make him go away.
Something I really appreciate is there's a scene where Hayama is criticizing Akane, and then their commander comes in and says, "You need to shut up because you're undermining our teamwork, and then by extension, you're undermining this entire operation because the way the military functions is that everybody has to be on the same page and they have to minimize conflict within themselves, with each other in order to accomplish their mission."
Right. It's because it's about the mission. What is also maybe coming through here is the importance of consensus not only just in a military way, but in a Japanese way. In that Japanese culture is quite a bit more consensus driven than like we are. And so that part of that might be coming through as well. And just the need to have everybody in line and doing the best job that they can. And if necessary, they have to save each other, which is exactly what happens.
Also, I really like the JXSDF hats. Those are some really cool logos. I wouldn't mind having one. You can get them. I saw some people selling them on eBay for $30 a pop.
It's nice. It's a nice design, and it's also something you want to do in a Godzilla film. Just like in Mechagodzilla, they have with the
cool jackets.
The jackets and the emblems and it's official. You want to make it official, and it feels more real. It feels more like a Godzilla movie.
Although I have to admit, the name of that organization is a little bit weird. It's the Japanese Xenomorph Self-Defense Force. When I hear Xenomorph, I think Alien, not Godzilla.
Right. It sort of makes sense, but not. I don't know. I could take it. I can take that or leave it.
Yeah. We had a cameo by another Godzilla in this movie.
Yes, Hideki Matsui.
The baseball player.
Yes, his nickname is Godzilla.
Yeah, I originally thought it was because he was tall, but you found out it's because he
a skin
problem. But now it's because he can hit really hard.
Right. It later became known for that. But he was with the Yomiuri Giants team in Japan before he came to the United States. But he was with I think 5 or so MLB teams in the U.S. And I remember him being with the Yankees.
Yes. In fact, the team he played for in Japan was considered to be the New York Yankees of Japan, right?
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's a fun little cameo to throw in there. It's a nice little reference without, again, making it obvious because nobody calls him Godzilla. He's just there. It's
a good pop culture reference. It makes sense because of his nickname, but also because baseball is a pretty big deal in Japan. And so it's getting a little bit of pop culture into the Godzilla world, but you have to show the world around you in these movies, because if you just show our main characters all the time doing stuff, it gets a little blah. You want to have your hospital scene, you want to have your evacuation scene, you want to have some of these things lined up. You want to have sort of like this scene with Matsui. It reminded me of the pop concert scene in Biolante.
Yes.
Where she starts singing and then she's like, "Oh, bye everybody, we gotta go." It was a little thing with this part with Matsui, but it fit and it added to the general feel of the movie.
How much would you bet that our Cubs-loving roboticist from Mechagodzilla loves this guy? Probably his favorite baseball player.
Might be, even though he was with the Yankees, and he was a Cubs fan.
Yeah.
And as a Cubs fan, we just very recently, Yu Darvish joined the Chicago Cubs, which is another really big Japanese player.
All right, Brian, since we've had such fun talking about this before, are you happy that we're now back to 88 minutes?
This movie does not seem long, but it also doesn't seem short. I believe it's the optimum length. Like 90 minutes, give or take maybe 10 minutes on each side. But if you go past that, unless you have enough material to take up that extra time, then you shouldn't do that extra time. This movie doesn't seem weighted down by stuff that is extra. There's not much extra stuff in this movie that I would cut, really. Because you want to be able to tie up your story nice and well. And this movie does do that. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like we have all of these just long, talky scenes where they just talk about Godzilla all day long. Well, next, let's move to stuff that we didn't like so much.
Like I said at the beginning, this is a Godzilla movie I wish I could like more. I really, really do. But every time I watch it, I keep going back to how I still feel like Mechagodzilla is better overall. I mean, there are some things that this does get better, but...
Well, you're not alone in that. I like Mechagodzilla more, I think. It's tough, though. It's closer maybe for me than for you, but between the two of them.
Yeah, it's just, for one thing, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, is there are certain aspects of this and Mechagodzilla that I keep getting mixed up with each other, because there are, especially at the beginning, there are a lot of similarities here. It's easy for me to get them mixed up. They both start off with flashbacks. I have heavy military involvement. The military is engaging Godzilla. Our main character is a woman who is fighting alongside all these men to try to take him out, and then she's the only survivor, and all of her teammates die, and they start off similar.
And both movies start and end with the military.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yes. But it's mostly at the beginning where I get stuff confused. It might be in part, like I said, because I haven't watched these movies enough to keep them separate in my own head.
I've watched these movies so many times I could replay them in my head.
Yeah. It's just... It's also not helped by the fact that it's the same screenwriter, and I don't know, maybe I'm just being too harsh on this. It's not like when we were talking about Sekizawa, we all knew that Sekizawa had certain things that he would do a lot, and he has certain character archetypes and conventions that he would use, but I never seemed to be bothered by those as much as I was this time around.
Sekizawa knew more about how to reinvent and turn the formulas around.
Which is why I will, like I've said before, I will give them credit. They go in a completely different direction once you get past that opening, where it becomes not a revenge story, it becomes a redemption story. So kudos there.
That difference is stark.
Yeah, that's probably the starkest difference between this and that one. But again, if I was sitting in a theater and watching this, my first thought would have been, didn't I watch this movie 2 years ago?
With Mechagodzilla, it's the tough woman who wants revenge, and then in this one it's the sensitive woman who wants redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, that's where it veers off in another direction, which again, I'm very grateful for.
Question though, which one do you like better? This or Mechagodzilla 2?
Overall, this one, but
Me too.
But as I will mention later, well, this I do think is a better film, at least in Mechagodzilla 2, it wasn't presenting some really intriguing ideas and then not doing anything with them. That one, it was just super simple. It's just like, oh, here's a giant robot. And then there are things in this one that I wish it had done more with. But overall, this is a better movie.
As a movie, this is more cinematic of a movie, yeah. I get what you mean, though, because this is such an intriguing concept of Kiryu going berserk. You could have made the whole rest of this movie about Kiryu going berserk.
Yeah, the scene you're talking about it's about 40 minutes and 20 seconds in, and it's such an amazing idea. The concept of Kiryu having a biological CPU, one that was cloned from the original Godzilla, it was such an intriguing idea. And then you get halfway through the movie, and then that biological CPU's natural instincts reassert themselves when it hears Godzilla's roar. And when Kiryu does that, when it makes a sound, it doesn't even sound mechanical anymore. It actually sounds like the original Godzilla's roar a bit.
Yeah.
There was so much story potential with that. It's, as a writer, when I hear about that, there's so many ideas go through my head about what they could have done. You could have done stuff like the Kiryu could have turned on the humans and then sided with Godzilla, so then they had to fight both of them. Or maybe it goes after Godzilla itself, independent of the humans. Or the human pilots who were in Kiryu could have been trapped inside and need to be rescued. If they really wanted to explore the idea of giving Kiryu this cloned biological CPU, I honestly think they missed the mark. It's almost a footnote in this story. You have this wonderful idea that really differentiates it from the two previous versions, and then they do nothing with it. And all I keep asking is why.
It becomes a cul-de-sac. It's like a story form of a cul-de-sac.
Yeah, because you have 5 minutes, about 5 minutes, where Kiryu is running around doing whatever it wants. It even takes out one of the herons, almost kills those pilots. And then it shuts down, and I'm like, okay, fine. If you're just going to let it run around for a little bit, have it shut down, then maybe for the rest of the movie, you're always running the risk that if we turn this thing back on, it's going to do the same thing. They don't even do that. They fix it. And it never happens again for the rest of the movie. I would have at least been a little bit happier if the same thing had happened during the climax. And then that complicated things for everybody.
Or they could have at least created the tension that something else could go wrong. And like have the characters be more concerned about the risks.
Yeah.
But instead, they just sort of, maybe they solve the problem too quickly.
Yeah, they definitely solve the problem too quickly, because after those 5 minutes, it's just another robot. It's just another Mechagodzilla. It just becomes a cooler looking version. I hate to say this, but it just becomes a cooler looking version of the 1993 Mechagodzilla. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't have a whole lot of personality. I mean, it certainly has more than that 1993 version, but still, it doesn't hold a candle to the Showa Mechagodzilla in terms of personality. If the idea was they wanted to have something that would make Mechagodzilla fail the first time that they used it, I think they would have been better off coming up with something else. Because that's one thought that went through my head. Maybe that was their thinking. But again, you're sitting on too good of an idea. And Sarah even has a line later on where she says, "Why should it fight Godzilla when they should be friends?" And I wrote in my notes, exactly. Even the movie seems to be a little bit aware of this. I can also see what the filmmakers were trying to do. They wanted to use Kiryu as a mirror for Akane, who feels worthless. Her character arc is learning that she has value. But I say again, they missed an opportunity. They could have had this arc for her and utilized this concept. Perhaps a better route, if they really wanted this story, would have been to create a defiant AI instead of a biological CPU.
It's just that they had a missed opportunity where they could have made turning Kiryu back to normal, they could have made that a bit more of a struggle. But I get what you mean. Yeah.
And this is actually, way back in our first episode, I mentioned that there was a Godzilla movie that inspired a kaiju novella that I co-wrote with a couple of our friends, and it was this movie. Because I remember reading about this in GFan, and the article said this was a missed opportunity, and I thought, well, maybe it's not so bad. And then I watched the movie myself, and then I thought, you know what, I agree with them. This was such a wonderful concept. So Destroyer, which is the novella I'm talking about, it takes this concept and talks about it's very similar. You have this giant cyborg with a brain that serves as the CPU, and it was cloned from dinosaur DNA. So we're getting probably a little Jurassic Park-ish there, and it's unleashed in a city as a weapon of war, because this takes place during a futuristic war, and then it goes berserk and strands its handlers in the middle of the city, and it's running around, and the characters are all fighting with each other. They're fighting with potential enemies in this city, and while also trying to deal with the monster. So I decided my goal was to take this idea and do something with it. Now, I didn't use every possible idea that you could have done, but I wanted to do something with this because it would have been, I think, a unique opportunity to do something really different. And instead, they kind of play it safe, which is probably my biggest gripe with this. This feels like such a safe movie. I like what they do in this, but it feels incredibly safe. Maybe it's because it's coming off of the heels of GMK, and GMK was incredibly good. It was incredibly different. It was experimental. It was daring. And this just feels by the numbers by comparison.
Yeah, the studio probably wanted to play it safe and make sure that they got a return. Right now, in American movies, almost the name of the game is playing it safe. I feel like some movies that come out in franchises now, it's like the financial advisors in the studio were the ones that figured out what to do.
Remember back in our Biolante episode when you said you didn't like the thing at the beginning of the movie when it's talking about the alert system?
Yeah, the text scrolling across the computer screen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have that kind of again. We have text exposition that pops up during the opening sequence that just tells us things. It's not even the characters talking. It's just the text popping up in the middle of the scene, just saying like, oh, yeah, this happened. And then then the anti-megalosaurus force, which sounds incredibly ridiculous, it was formed in this year, and then they went and did all this stuff while we're watching a military operation. And I'm thinking, you couldn't make this dialogue? Is that how you saved yourself a couple extra minutes to keep it under 90 minutes? You just put the text up on the screen? I mean, it's not like Shin Godzilla where it's just telling us all the character names and where they are. It's giving us actual information in the middle of the scene, just as text, not a narrator or anything.
I would not want a narrator, but I also would not want extra dialogue just to get the point across, because you're going to be using more time than you need. It might have just been an effort to just not have to edit so much or keep adding stuff that the audience wouldn't find interesting.
My next criticism, I know it might sound like a nitpick. I don't understand why Godzilla will actually flinch and react when he's being attacked by the military, but then there are a couple of instances where he just stands there and takes shots from Kiryu and does nothing.
Oh, so it's a little inconsistent, you mean?
Yeah, it just didn't make any sense to me, because the first time that he meets Kiryu and Kiryu bombards him with missiles, he just stands there, does nothing.
Yeah.
No reaction whatsoever. He's just dead. Why aren't you doing anything? I mean, react. Dang it. React. Where are you, Kitagawa? Act. Do something. Why would you just stand there? I don't understand. I mean, even if it's not technically hurting him, do something. Don't just stand there. But like I said, that's just early on. He reacts to being attacked by the military, and then during the second battle with Kiryu, he reacts to getting hit. So there's no consistency, as you said. And once again, because this is a Tezuka film, we have a stinger, a post-credit scene. I have to admit, I've gotten used to waiting through the credits because Marvel movies have ruined me. This one, however, I thought it was a poor decision to have this scene be at the end of the credits. Because usually when you have a scene at the end of the credits, it's to tease another movie, or it's a nice little bonus. It's a nice little cherry on top, like in Mechagodzilla.
It's a reward for the audience.
Yeah, like in Mechagodzilla. We didn't need that scene necessarily, but it was nice to have it. That was fine. Before the credits rolled in this, I didn't feel any closure. I felt unsatisfied. And then you got to the end of the credits, and you get that next scene, and then I had closure. That should have been the final scene of the movie before the credits roll.
Right, so the story shouldn't end in that kind of a scene after the credits.
Yeah.
So I think it's still part of the story proper.
Yeah. And so I think it was a poor choice on Tezuka's part to structure it that way. Because I think ending it with her saluting Kiryu and then cutting to the credits would have made a lot of sense.
Probably.
But I'm guessing he really likes having stingers, so he just moved that over there. Oh well, there are worse things that he could have done.
Next, we can do stuff that we thought was funny, or either in a laughing with or a laughing at sense of the word. But as far as laughing with, I really like Shin Takuma and his comic relief role as Sara's father. That one line that we were talking about before recording.
Would you like to have kids? I wrote terrible pickup line, dude. Yeah, terrible.
Like worst one ever.
Well, it's definitely in the top 10. You don't just walk up to some woman and ask her to have children.
He reminds me of Frankie Sakai from the original Mothra. I liked him better than this by a little bit, but it's a similar kind of character.
Yeah. In fact, if Frankie Sakai was still around, it was young enough, I would have said, have him play the part. He could have pulled that scene off pretty well, I think.
I enjoyed how during a couple of the scenes with Sara and Akane that he's there, but Akane totally ignores him.
Yeah.
I swear she rolled her eyes one time too, but she was in a conversation with Sara and he would say something and then she wouldn't even acknowledge him. And then she'd just keep talking to Sara. I thought that was good.
Yeah. Do you think...
She's like, whatever, dude. I mean, I'm talking to her.
I like to think that at least in my head canon, that they did actually get together, because they look like they'd be a pretty decent couple. And poor Sarah needs a new mom.
Thankfully, we didn't get like a wedding scene at the end or some obvious thing that they're going to smack us over the head with.
Yeah.
But it does imply that something might go somewhere.
Yeah. Something that I think it was intended to be funny, but I do kind of laugh at it a little bit. But it's mostly because it's something that we've all seen, and we kind of laugh. And I kind of laugh at those. I kind of laugh at these in real life too. And that is the beginning of the movie. We have these reporters who are out in the middle of a typhoon, and it's all rainy and windy, and they're saying, yeah, it's rainy and windy. And I keep thinking of these Weather Channel guys who, whenever there's a hurricane coming to Florida, they stand out there and said, yeah, look, it's rainy and windy. Like, yeah, we get it.
Jim Cantori.
Yeah. It's like, we know what a hurricane is. You don't need to stand out there, risk your life, and prove that it's rainy and windy.
But we do, though, because there are people at home that they want to see that. They want to know what it's like, because it's such an extraordinary event. And so instead of going out themselves, they're content to stay in and watch others. But thankfully, it wasn't like Geraldo Rivera, who got knocked over by the waves and stuff.
No, this guy almost got knocked over by Godzilla. That was the part where it was a little bit funny, where these guys are standing out there and they're talking about the typhoon, and then Godzilla, the living natural disaster, appears behind them.
Which that might be a nod to the original Mothra versus Godzilla with the typhoon.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah, it's not a in-your-face sort of reference, like where it has Godzilla coming out of the sand again or something like that. But it's a nice callback / reference without being too ridiculous in your level of referencing.
Yeah, but again, also the typhoons are frequent occurrences in Japan, so it was something they would recognize.
And it's a good way to introduce Godzilla is under the cover of a typhoon.
Mm-hmm. We've been talking a lot about Akane, and there's actually more that we could say, which we're going to do now in part 3. You're listening to Kaijuvision Radio.
In part 3 of the podcast, we discuss issues that were either brought up by the film directly or were going on in Japan at the time the film was released. And for this, we are doing women in the Godzilla movies and the firing of Makiko Tanaka. Makiko Tanaka was the first female foreign minister of Japan. But first, we're going to do women in the Godzilla movies. This is our third female main character in a row in the Godzilla series. So now's a good time to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
In general, women are, underrepresented compared to men in the Godzilla movies. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's a bit unfortunate, but yeah.
But we've had more emphasis, at least in this century, compared to the previous one.
Yeah, which has been a nice change, because I don't think, unless you want to count Miki Sagusa on rare occasions, none of the women who've been in these movies have been primary characters. They've usually been supporting characters. Maybe
the best woman character, which is it's hard to just declare one woman character in this whole series as the best one, but obviously in the 1954 film,
Emiko
with Emiko is such an important role, and she plays a love interest, but it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah, she makes some very serious contributions to the story, and she also has her own arc going on because she's forced into predicaments. She has to choose between the two men that she loves, and she also is trusted with a secret that she has to choose whether or not to reveal or not, because she's been entrusted with it, but revealing it may do a greater good for everyone involved. Could save Japan.
Yeah, she's given the responsibility of having that information and figuring out what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important in that she's not just the love interest. Because when you have a woman character, you at least the hope is that if the story works right with things, then you can get a female character that is not just some kind of stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Like a love interest or just devoted girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
nurturing, motherly character, those kinds of things, which Godzilla does. These Godzilla movies do have some of that going on, where there's a little bit of stereotypical characteristics going on, but it's best when you want to try to break out of those simple constructs.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue that Emiko is one of several examples I can think of where you have female characters who make a key decision in the course of the story that if they hadn't made that decision, then things would have been much different. May have even just ended the movie right there. Emiko revealing the oxygen destroyer propels the rest of the movie forward. It may have never been revealed otherwise.
Instead of going from one movie to the next movie to the next movie, it's more interesting really to go between all of the various types of characters that women play in the Godzilla series. So we have a number of different types. We have the nurturing role. We have the military woman role, or sometimes or otherwise strong physical woman. We have the island girl type. We have the reporter/photographer type. We have the psychical type, which I would throw Mikisugusa and the Shobijin into that category. There's also the mother or child role.
And occasionally we have politicians, like we did in this one.
And those, along with scientist, prime minister, android, or a genuine love interest, those are the more atypical roles. I threw really all of those into one category, which is the non-typical roles. One of the types that we have is definitely the nurturing role, and that would be seen in the 1993 film, Mechagodzilla 2.
Yeah, with Azusa.
Yes, who acts as a very motherly figure to Baby.
Baby Godzilla, yes. Yeah. She takes on that role and becomes his advocate. She's very maternal at that point.
We also have that in the other movies that have Baby in them. In the 1994 film, there's also a connection between Mikisugusa and Baby.
Yeah, it's not as strong as it is with Azusa, or as prominent, but I do think it's there.
I'd also classify the 2002 film that we're talking about now as a possible nurturing role between Akane and Sara.
I could see that, because they do help each other.
Yeah, they relate to each other, and it's maybe not like a nurturing mother-daughter connection necessarily, but there's still an emotional connection there. And it's not really a stereotypical situation, though. They're not like, oh, a baby, I must take care of it. It's not really that vibe.
You get a little bit of that with Kiriko, too, in Megaguirus, when she's interacting with the boy.
Yes.
She's very kind to him, because it's this whole other side of her. We're used to seeing her as angry and vengeful, but when she's with that kid, she becomes, it's a whole other side to her.
Yeah, and so we're able to make her character a better character by showing that side of her. Next, we have the military type, and that would be definitely Megaguirus.
Yeah, with Kiriko.
Yeah, and she's the tough one.
Yes.
And then in the 2002 film that we're doing today with Akane, that's a strong character too. But it's just only dealing with different things in her life.
Yeah, redemption as opposed to revenge.
And these roles are important because not only is it kind of it's almost like a commercial for women should join the JSDF.
Yeah.
Because there's a big drive towards recruiting women in the JSDF.
Yeah, there's been a big push for that.
But it's important to have these kinds of characters because it shows women in commanding, powerful roles. That starts happening as soon as the new century happens. We get in more central female characters. Alongside this, we have the otherwise strong physical woman characters, and that would definitely be in Godzilla vs. Gigan.
When we had Tomoko, Gengo's girlfriend.
There was one thing that we saw about how this is a role reversal between the man and the woman, where the woman is the one who knows martial arts, and she's the one protecting her boyfriend with her physical prowess. And that's a good way to switch things around in a movie. Other than playing the enemies, Godzilla vs. Gigan stands out as having a very, very powerful woman character who's physically, powerful. And that's really the first time we deal with a character like that. Is a woman with physical prowess.
Yeah, that I can think of.
She's also very independent. Even though she has a boyfriend, she still is. You can tell that she is a pretty independent thinker.
Yes, yeah, she is. She's also playful and flirtatious, which was very nice.
Yeah, it really fit with the atmosphere
and she
was going on.
And she doesn't take crap from Gengo at all. You know, when she finds the little picture of the monster he had modeled after her, and she gives him crap for it.
Yeah,
but it's in a very nice sort of way.
And that really gets to what a lot of women roles, what the goal is a lot of the time is a woman who is independent, a woman who knows what they want, and that they're not necessarily afraid to get it. And that goes kind of along with our next category, which is photographers or reporters. But it makes me think of the GMK film because that's with Yuri, because that's a big deal.
Yuri is one of my favorite female characters in the entire franchise. I love her. As I mentioned in the previous episode, what's great about her is that she fits in with the role of the truth-seeking reporter that we've seen several times in the Showa era. But when she starts, she's working for a low-budget TV network that makes stuff up, or they stage things so they can get ratings. And then she stumbles across something that's real, and she's doing real investigative reporting to try to uncover the truth.
But she also is independent. She asserts a lot of independence, and even in the scene where she's at the restaurant, she says how unfair it is and how it sucks to be a woman. And
yes,
that's one of the few times in Godzilla movies where the woman specifically says what her grievances are, and it's something that everybody can understand, is that she doesn't have as much independence as men do.
And I can't help but think that actually grew out of director Kaneko's experience making the Gamera trilogy, because all three of those movies have prominent female protagonists. They are the stars in those movies.
There is a little bit of an argument in the GMK film that Yuri's centrality as a character is undermined towards the end of the film, like maybe the third act, where instead it's her father who gets the center of the stage. But I wouldn't say that she gets completely sidelined either.
Well, he's doing all of the action parts, which I'm not necessarily sure I would have been able to believe that a character like her would have been able to do.
No, because you can't have it in the story where she goes into the submarine and does that herself, because then that wouldn't work.
But she also does push her father in a very weird kind of spiritual sense to take action when he's about ready to give up.
Regarding other reporters or photographers and characters like that, would definitely Yuriko Hoshi's two characters in the two 1964 films, Mothra vs. Godzilla and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. They're more sort of boxed in roles where she doesn't get to be all that independent, but at the same time, she fits into the story well, and her acting is very good. And her character she plays her character very well.
Mm-hmm. And once more, in Mothra vs. Godzilla, as we discussed in that episode, if she had made the plea that she did to the Shobijin, I'm not sure that Mothra would have intervened on Japan's behalf.
But of course, like we said in that episode, though, of course a woman's going to be the one doing that. Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit of a stereotypical stance, but back then, especially if they had the man say that, it would have been very odd. Mm-hmm. That's where you have the woman serving more of a stereotypical role, though, in the sort of, I'm the one that has to be the one who cares, therefore I'm going to have to say that line. A similar role to the Yuriko Hoshi characters in those two movies would be Kyoko Kagawa's depiction of Mishi Hanamura, who is the photographer who was around Zenchan Fukuda. And
Yes.
it's very similar roles that way.
Usually acting as a voice of reason for his harebrained schemes.
There's also the 1999 film.
With Yuki.
Yeah, our reporter who has to get dragged out of the building because she wants to report on stuff right there as it's happening.
And again, working as a bit of a voice of reason.
Yeah, she helps the audience sort of express their feelings of, at all the things that are going on with that dude and his daughter. In the 2004 film, we have another reporter. And she's the one who's uncovering the mysteries that regarding the Zillions.
Yeah, Anna Otanashi.
Yeah, she's good in that. She was revealed, got to reveal things. She got to have a role in that, even though really her part is very not all that prominent, though.
No, it's not.
Next, we have our women who in the Godzilla movies who have more psychical roles, and that would definitely be any of these movies that have the Shobijin, but
Yes.
also definitely Miki Sagusa.
Yeah, and then in Godzilla vs. Destroyer, we had Meru, Mickey's little friend and I guess protege, because she's a little bit younger and Mickey's losing her powers, so she's preparing Meru to take over for her.
At first, I thought that the Miki Sagusa character might be a symbol for an ultimate symbol for the sidelined woman character, just because she doesn't get to do a whole lot. Even though sometimes there's a plot point that involves her, she's still a pretty well sidelined character. She doesn't have a big enough of a role. And there are often women who come in anyway, other woman characters.
And upstage her.
Yeah, and they upstage her. But also, her character was never a deep character in the first place. And she sometimes has like the stereotypical woman nurturing love with Godzilla and or baby Godzilla.
with her with her favorite line, yeah.
Yeah, she looks at Godzilla and says, Godzilla. But we've read some of this where it's like, why was she not? It seems like she was not a very well thought out character. It's not a very deep character. And what's strange about the Miki Sagusa character is how she doesn't have much of an arc. And it's not until the last movie that she actually gets more powers. And it's only, the last two movies.
Yeah.
When she gets real power. And even then, she kind of doesn't. And then when she does get her powers, isn't it because she's trying to save a man? And that's the thing that gets her
I think so. Are you talking about in Space Godzilla? When she has the telekinesis?
Right.
Yeah.
She's trying to save him, and so her brain just works a little bit more because she's trying to save him. So I don't know if you're gonna do like a feminist analysis of these movies, what you're gonna say about that part. But they could have had it where by the end of Biollante, by the end of that film, they could have had her fully developed her skills. And then the rest of the movies, what could have happened? She could have used those skills, and that's how she would have become more relevant in the story. Like we said in the Godzilla vs. Biollante episode, there's a lot of missed potential. There's a lot of potential with the Miki Sagusa character, but they often didn't follow through on it or get anything out of it as much.
Yeah, and I do, in retrospect, really wish they had, especially if they decided to make her, for whatever reason, to make her the through-line character.
Which is another puzzling choice.
Yeah, because when she's in Biollante, she doesn't come across as, oh, this is a character you're going to be seeing a lot. It's like they just decided that on the fly.
I sort of wonder if the producers of all these 90s movies where they said, well, we're not going to have the Shobijin back, but let's have a girl to replace the Shobijin. It's almost like she's a stand-in for the Shobijin.
And then they had the Shobijin come back anyway.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. But, but speaking of the Shobijin, they've had a very prominent presence throughout these movies. Always associated with Mothra, and they played multiple roles. They've served as priestesses. They've been a little bit maternal at points as well. Some would say that in most incarnations, even though there's two of them, they aren't distinct from each other because they speak in unison. and such. But I do know that in the 90s when Toho made their trilogy of Mothra films, that was something that they did differently. They have them in those, but each one of them have just much more distinct personalities, and they aren't speaking in unison all of the time.
Looking back at the Showa movies, though, I wish they had done more with the Shobijin, because sometimes they're just MacGuffins.
In Mothra, they definitely were.
Yeah. It's just that there's a little bit of missed potential with that, too, maybe. Because some of it is they're just doing exposition.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Mothra is thinking this, and we're not sure if this will work out one way or another when they're talking about stuff in the plot.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't really do as much, or they're sometimes just held as hostage.
Mm-hmm.
Another type of female character that we have in the Godzilla movies is a sort of island girl, which is exemplified by the Dio character played by Kumi Mizuno in Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Mm-hmm. That is a really memorable role, and she does have things to do, but it's mostly she's tagging along with the larger group.
Yeah, she's feisty. She doesn't take crap from the boys. Because of her, they figure out how to awaken Godzilla because she has the wire with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows a little bit about the island, so they know where to go to elude red bamboo.
And she's also wearing nice clothes, as far as
she's eye candy.
Being able to help out the young men in the audience with their fantasies, so to speak. But there's also an island girl-ish in the movie right after that, which is Son of Godzilla, with Saiko, who is the professor's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of being an island girl, she was sort of forced to become an island girl and wants to escape.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, both of these two movies, it's pretty much the only woman characters that are in either one. And in Son of Godzilla, she's the only woman in the movie.
Yeah, that...
Like, Son of Godzilla is a sausage fest.
Yeah.
If there ever was one. She's like, what, 17, 18 years old at the time, and is surrounded by men the entire time. It's weird when there's that dynamic, because it's sort of like she's a token woman character.
A little bit of a token. I guess Dio is a bit of a token as well, but she contributes, I think, a little bit more to the overall story. I mean, she's also a link between Infant Island and the rest of our male heroes, because when one of them gets captured and sent into the dungeon where they're manufacturing the yellow liquid, they don't think anything of him, but as soon as he mentions that he's friends with Dio, everything changes. So like, oh, you know her, and then they proceed to trust him, and then they're able to sabotage the liquid after that.
At the same time, just because a woman is given something to do in the movie, it doesn't mean that women have a prominent role in these movies, though, right? Like, there's a difference between these things.
Yes,
like
as we see with Mickey, most definitely.
Yeah, and it's like it seems like even when Mickey does have something to do, there still isn't something that happens. There's a difference between giving a woman a role in something versus giving women just something to do. There are a number of atypical roles that women in the Godzilla series have had over the years, though, and especially Kumi Mizuno as Namikawa.
Yes, that is, I think, probably one of the most interesting, dynamic, and well-written characters for women, especially in the Showa era.
Her character functions really well within the story. It's a well-drawn character. Her motivations are very clear, and she's unconventional. She's going against the grain by rebelling against her computer controllers. But she is then sort of punished for that in her death. But at the same time, just because her character ends up in a bad way at the end, that doesn't mean that her role is worse or anything.
Yeah, and what also makes it interesting is all of the zillion women look exactly alike. So they all look like her, and they're all completely cold. They are stripped of any sort of humanity. So even though they're all beautiful, there's nothing there. They're essentially machines. So there's a very interesting commentary going on there, I think. And I think might have been perhaps speaking a little bit to the cultural norms and expectations that were going on in Japan and we're in the process of changing.
Yeah, and it emphasizes how what she does is so unconventional. Because it's sort of like a dystopia, the Zillions. It's kind of like it's kind of like a dystopia for women. Because they're all the same, and they don't seem to have much independence. They do everything they're told to do. And since it's kind of a stylized, extreme version of what real life is like for women.
Hey, the phrase "they should be seen, not heard" comes to mind.
Right, and so this is that has a cultural plug-in. Definitely to the times that of what was going on at the time. And still, a lot of it is. But it's a great character.
Wonderful character.
Great character. And she plays the biggest love interest in any of the Godzilla movies.
She actually gets to kiss somebody.
Yeah, and it's even somebody who's not Japanese. But it's a rare for a Godzilla movie to have an actual relationship being depicted.
Do you think, I remember this is something I came across in our reading, do you think the fact that Namikawa, even though she helps the heroes in the end, the fact that she's more or less playing a villain, and it always seems to be these villainous characters, these villainous female characters who are breaking out of the mold, is that supposed to be some sort of bizarre commentary as well? Some have argued that.
I think it depends on the movie, because with the Keylocks, for instance.
Yeah, the Keylock Queen.
Yeah, that I don't know how to really go about that. Yeah, she's a woman, but since she's an alien, does that make her a sort of outsider to the cultural norms instead of somebody who breaks away from those?
I wouldn't say so. But the thing is the Keylock Queen isn't much of a character anyway.
She's a little bit of a cardboard cutout.
Yeah.
An evil cardboard cutout who just happens to be a woman, and then all the other Keylocks are pretty much women.
Yeah.
Unless they're little, slave men that they have later on in that one scene that they brainwashed.
Yeah. But Namikawa is very different when it comes to that. So, because she actually has a character. So, but she's breaking out of the norms to help the heroes. That's what's different compared to the Keylock Queen.
Mm-hmm. Also, what do you make out of the it's been postulated that the women in these movies that are the bad characters, so to speak, like Namikawa and the Keylock Queen, is that because they're evil characters who happen to be women, that means that that them getting killed, it ends up being punishment for them breaking out of the mold. But that would almost be saying that the movie is trying to reinforce the system of how women are treated, which I don't believe that that's what these movies are trying to do.
With Namikawa, it seems more like an illustration of the consequences that could be faced if you step out of line. Not necessarily saying that going against the norms is bad. It's showing that there will be forces that will push against it. And
it makes her look more courageous.
Yes.
Because the odds are so much against her. No, I don't believe it's a punishment for breaking social norms.
In a metatextual way, I think. Within the movie, it is.
Mm.
But again, she's executed by the Zillions, who are very much the villains.
Yeah.
So they are punishing nonconformity, but they're the bad guys.
Yeah. It's not the movie punishing women in general for nonconformity. Another atypical role for women in the Godzilla movies is androids. We have two. We have the one American woman from the 1993 film in Mechagodzilla 2.
Played by actress Shelley Sweeney.
Yeah, and her scenes, a lot of those scenes were deleted, but the general context is that this was a social commentary sort of about accepting people who were different. I think that's essentially what it was. But it was about accepting her, and once it comes out that she's an android, they're like, oh, okay. And they totally still treat her like human. But it's sort of Westworldian.
Yeah.
The definite best example of being an android would be the 1975 film
Katsura.
Terror of Mechagodzilla with, Katsura.
She's one of my favorite female characters in all of these movies. She's very complicated. But then again, I also just really love that movie. But she gets to play a lot of different sort of roles in that. She's a victim. She's a self-sacrificial hero in a way.
And she's interested in a man.
She's interested in a man, so she's a love interest as well. Mm-hmm. She's something of a villain as well, but she's a villain who's being manipulated. It's like Namikawa in a way, but it's not quite the same. Because unlike with Namikawa, she wasn't born into a society that made her this way. We see her before she becomes the cyborg, before she's being manipulated by our alien villains. She was innocent, and she's made into a weapon. And that parallels what they do with Titanosaurus, who she controls, because Titanosaurus was a gentle creature as well. Was being forced into doing something that she wouldn't normally do.
Only in the context of her, it's about her breaking away from that control.
Yes.
And doing what she feels needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. She also is she's also a daughter and is trying to be a voice of reason with her father. She does a lot of different things, wears a lot of different hats. And I think that's one of the reasons why the fandom really likes that movie and really likes her, is because she gets to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, she's a very popular character, for sure. We also have some women who are doctors/professors. One of those would be Final Wars.
Yes.
And she's awesome. She also she lasts through the whole movie.
If I remember correctly,
yeah,
yes.
And she is she's really good. Rie Kikukawa. She was the UN molecular biologist, Miyuki Otonashi, and she was quite good looking as well. But I remember her most for that scene, and where he tells her, "Well, I was expecting somebody that looked a little different than you." Another doctor character would definitely be Yuriko Hoshi coming back in Mechagodzilla. Right, and she plays Yoshino Yoshizawa.
Yes,
and she's got she's a pretty well drawn character.
Yeah,
she has motivations, her desire to destroy Godzilla and avenge her colleagues who Godzilla killed. Mm-hmm. But also so there's a nice backstory there. But also she plays a pretty big role in devising the Dimension Tide weapon, and she's given a pretty prominent role.
She's also a woman with authority, because everyone defers to her, and she doesn't take crap from any of these whippersnappers. Yeah,
she's a pretty central figure in the anti-Godzilla forces. Now there's also a scientist character in Kyoko Manabe in 1968's Destroy All Monsters. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit, besides the fact that she is a scientist, she does play more of a stereotypical role, really, because she's the sister of our protagonist.
The little sister.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Obviously, the scene where he rips off her earrings, that's a big deal.
Yes.
And her, I love how she sort of plays an evil character for a while.
Mm-hmm, when she's under mind control.
Yeah, but I love her acting when she's got the key lock sense of everything that I'm going to do is going to work out fine, and so I'm going to be really pompous and have the smile and the attitude, even in the dubbing.
Yes,
that comes through.
The key lock arrogance.
I came to talk to the press. You shut up.
The key lock arrogance. Yes.
Yeah. I like that role. That was great. And then the part where everybody realizes monsters are going to attack Tokyo, and then she has that big smile on her face. but that was great too. Mm-hmm. I really like that character. Along with that, in 2016's Shin Godzilla, we have not a scientist, but more of a government bigwig. She's and also she's the daughter of a prominent political figure, and so she has that going for her.
And she has aspirations of becoming president of the United States.
But she's very authoritative. Mm-hmm. Not authoritarian, but authoritative. She's also great in that in the scene where they're talking about where they're getting across the gravity of possibly having another nuclear bomb in Japan.
Yes.
And that scene's just great with how she is able to help us put us into that situation. And she's also very good looking, and her
big brown eyes.
Yes, and her English is quite good too. And that comes through. And even though, like, I think if you're an average person, average American, you probably think that it might be bad, but no, it's actually pretty good. But yeah, that's a great character. We don't really see that kind of a character in the Godzilla movies until we get to that point, really.
A female politician?
Well, just a female politician who's the attitude.
Yes, the attitude, definitely.
The matter-of-fact American kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And she plays it well.
Mm-hmm. Because she's supposed to be Japanese-American.
Yeah. And then along those lines, we have a prime minister character in this movie that we're covering today. It's
a small role, but it's Kumi Mizuno.
Mm-hmm. And she, just like the other Showa actors that come back for these Millennium movies, they all got pretty good parts. But that one's good too. Kumi Mizuno is just, a lot of people will recognized her, and she was such a big actress in these Godzilla movies during the Showa series that she was in, and it's great to bring her back. But her ability to get across to us the urgency of the situation and how what dire straits Japan is in with regards to the Godzilla threat, and she's great at doing the exposition for that, as well as her scene with all the reporters getting all physically bumped around as she's going down the steps, and she has that air of I don't care, I can handle all you people, and that's great to have that sense of strength.
And then also along those lines, going back to the Showa era, we have Princess Salno.
Yeah. Akiko Wakabayashi.
Yeah, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about her. She fits a couple of different roles. She's an authority figure. She's a ruler, but she also kind of has the psychical thing going on after the extraterrestrial presence takes her over, because then she can predict the future. She has premonitions about the coming of monsters, and she goes around trying to warn people about the monsters coming. Even the Shobijin are weirded out by her. That should tell you something.
Yeah, she's the mistress of predicting bad things for everybody.
Yeah, she's the prophet with nothing good to say.
and she knows that everything she says is the absolute truth, and so you're stupid if you don't listen to her.
Mm-hmm. And she serves as a vessel for the aliens who have been previously ravaged by Ghidorah. And those scenes when she's talking about Ghidorah, because keep in mind, we haven't seen Ghidorah yet. It creates this wonderful atmosphere, this sense of dread. Yeah, this huge gravity to when she's talking about Ghidorah. Because when she drops that name and starts talking about him, everything kind of stops.
Yeah, you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
The other thing that's cool about Akiko Wakabayashi's role as Princess Salno is that we rarely see her in a beautiful presentation.
Yeah.
At the beginning, we have her in the dress as the princess, but that's jettisoned quite quickly, literally. Mm-hmm. She just jettisoned out of the plane. But there's a sort of unexpected female role that occurs where she turns into the prophet, and then her clothes get all
frumpy?
Frumpy, because she traded clothes with
a fisherman.
With the fisherman. And it's a role, it's a bit of a reversal, because you wouldn't expect Akiko Wakabayashi to look like that.
Yeah, because if you see her and you only live twice, she is a beautiful woman.
Right. And so that's you're subverting the expectation. And it's sort of like Ingrid Bergman in Notorious. Mm-hmm. Or something like that, like where you're subverting the type, you're working against type, and that's important to do with female roles sometimes when it's appropriate. There are two movies though that really sort of fail on most levels, and one of them be Godzilla vs. Megalon,
because there are no women in it unless you want to count the Ceetopian.
We have a 2-second long take of a woman warrior with a knife, and she's like
Grr.
doing her, yeah. Doesn't talk, and then we have
the awkward dancers.
Yeah, then we have our awkward dancers with their outfits and stuff, and they don't say anything either.
Nope.
And there's no way that you can gloss over that and try to make it look good. Because there's literally not a single woman that says a word in it.
Yeah. That one fails so hard. But then again, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla fails on a lot of levels.
Yeah. But then there's also the 2014 Godzilla from the United States with Elizabeth Olsen as Elle Brody, who's the wife. And gosh, she just doesn't get to do much. She's a woman in peril part of the time. And then the other part of the time, she's like, what, doting, supportive wife character.
And mom.
And mom, yeah. It's just that she gets to witness things. Mm-hmm. This one and Megalon are perhaps our two weakest ones in the woman department.
Probably. You also had who dies at the beginning and is, she's the woman. Yeah, she's the woman in the refrigerator. She works as a motivator for his dad.
What did she say? Something like, I don't know how excited I could possibly be about a character that lasts 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But I guess there were a lot of complaints about Bryan Cranston not being used enough either.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if anybody is not used enough, it's definitely Juliette Binoche, which I really like Juliette Binoche as an actress. I think she's awesome. I've seen a lot of stuff with her in it, and pretty much everything I've seen her in is good.
You also had Ken Watanabe's sidekick there. She does only a little bit more than the mom.
Yes, she's the one that helps to manage our favorite slideshow.
Yes, the slideshow. Monarch and those slideshows, man.
Though this doesn't involve actresses, I do believe that Michiru Oshima's contribution to the Godzilla series as composer for 3 of these movies, that's an important contribution.
Yes.
Because there aren't a lot of women who are on the production, behind the scenes of these movies.
No, not at all. And I'm hard-pressed to think of too many female film composers, period, really.
Right.
And the fact that she gets to be the only woman to compose music for any of these Godzilla movies.
And when she applied for the job, didn't they think that she was a man when they looked at her name? And then they were surprised that she was a woman?
I wouldn't be surprised.
I believe she said that when she visited G-Fest.
Mm-hmm.
So who's your favorite female character out of all of these characters in the Godzilla series?
Namikawa is definitely high up there. And as I mentioned before, I'm also very fond of Katsura. I know some people would look at Katsura and say she's not a strong character, but she's a very complicated one. Like I mentioned, she gets to do a lot of different things and fill into a lot of different roles. And it should be noted that Katsura is the only female character in any of these movies who was written by a woman.
Right, yeah.
Which I think explains why she has such a tremendous amount of depth. It's because it was a woman who wrote that screenplay.
It's really close for me about which one is really my favorite, but I'd have to go with Chiharu Niyama as Yuri Tachibana in GMK.
I love Yuri too. Yuri's also on my list.
Yuri's like probably my favorite one, and her delivery is so good. She seems so genuine when she does her lines. She's not just reading her lines. Like, she's the absolute opposite of that. And she comes across as genuine, and yet she's also so very good looking.
Yes.
And out of all of especially the female protagonists, I love our female protagonist from this movie, but also Megaguirus. But the Yuri character is just so cool. She is a really cool character, and they really put a lot of thought and work into making her a really good character. Because if it was the wrong woman, or if it wasn't somebody who knew how to act as well, the movie would have just failed.
Oh, yeah, because she holds everything together.
Yeah, Yuri's the keystone of all of this. When I first saw GMK, I was so absolutely blown away by the movie in general, but also by her specifically, because she carries the movie so much of the time.
And again, she gets to play multiple different kinds of roles in this, because she's a reporter, she's a daughter, she's a friend, perhaps even a potential love interest. she gets to wear a lot of different hats. She's a very multifaceted character. If you want to write good fiction, because we as people are all very multifaceted, we play different roles. We're all sons and daughters. We're friends. We're lovers. We're all these different things. And having characters who are written like that as well, it helps them seem more real, and it also makes them much more interesting.
Namikawa has a great character arc. Yuri has a fantastically good character arc,
yes.
too. It shows that they put work into the part, into creating this character. That's so important. Rather than just having a woman who plays just one role. But it's more than just giving a woman something to do, but putting her in the middle of the action, making her the driver of the plot. And that's what I really like to see. And a female protagonist in a Godzilla movie makes a whole lot of sense. Moving on to our other topic, this is about Makiko Tanaka and her firing as the first female foreign minister. I'll give you a little bit of background. Her father was prime minister from 1972 to 1974. He had a lot of scandals, including the Lockheed scandal, and he sort of had this almost gang leader kind of image as a politician. He was also in charge of MIDI for a while, and he was in the LDP. When he was in MIDI, he was under Prime Minister Ikeda. It's funny that the character that Kumi Mizuno plays in this film, her name is Machiko Tsuge. Now the character the woman we're talking about now, who was foreign minister, who was fired, was Makiko Tanaka. They both have the same initials. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's anything. It's rather interesting.
Yes. And similar sounding names too.
Yeah. She was definitely a strong personality. Speaking of strong personalities, she was known as a loose cannon. She fought with bureaucrats at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs a lot. It really helped to weaken the government of Prime Minister Koizumi as well. It was one of the scandals that he had to deal with. But she was a strong woman. She seemed to make a lot of enemies. To start with, she complained that she was put in an office as Minister of Foreign Affairs, that she was inside, that there wasn't even a map of the world in there, which we even have that in our office. There were no foreign language dictionaries and no international newspapers in there.
Yeah, so it really hampers her ability to communicate.
But at the same time, she's not the one who often is making decisions. It's the bureaucrats under her that make the decisions, and she executes them. It strikes me as not as much of a Secretary of State situation in this country, but she doesn't answer to the bureaucrats necessarily, but she has to get along with them, and she kind of chose to not get along with them. One of the issues that she had besides that was she supposedly shared documents about private, military funds to her son, who was an accountant.
Uh-oh.
And there was a small scandal that came out of that. But then also she met with Secretary of State Colin Powell, and she said something about what she said he said about the missile defense program. And Colin Powell's people had to come out and say, no, actually, he did not say that. And so there was a bit of a gaffe with that. She was called an amateur by the bureaucrats because when you get into government as an appointed position like this, there are bureaucrats who have been there, comparatively forever. And they're the ones that know the most. And so these were the people that were really running a lot of things. And so she was constantly at odds with these people.
She became incredibly popular because she was always criticizing the conservative old guard in the government, but which was part of what led to all of these scandals. And it went so far as to call her underlings, which I'm guessing are those bureaucrats you were talking about, a quote nest of devils. Strong words, very, very strong words.
Yeah, and a lot of her personality was about speaking truth to power. And challenging authority, and so that was why she got so much popularity.
Mm-hmm. And she was demanding a thorough just house cleaning with the government, just getting all of these guys out as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. In fact, she was so much against the traditional authority that she actually was against the prospect of Koizumi visiting the Yasukuni Shrine. Now, part of this was that her father, when he was prime minister, he was the prime minister who was in power when Japan reestablished diplomatic relations with China. And so her father was popular in China, and so as a result, she was as well. And so I think her being against Koizumi going to the Yasukuni Shrine had something to do with her popularity in China and her probably not wanting to get into it, I guess, with the Chinese over the Yasukuni Shrine. Like, I'm guessing that it was because she didn't want to hamper relations between Japan and China. Another gaffe was that she was speaking at a political event in Gunma Prefecture, and she was helping a political candidate who wanted to get elected, and she said that she didn't even know his name, and it seemed like she was almost trying to undermine the candidate. And she specifically said, "I don't know you, don't touch me." And then the candidate turned around and lost. And so that was a gaffe on her part. There was also an episode where she leaked comments by the emperor. And that is something that you really don't want to do. It's something that everybody avoids. And then it was after 9/11, because that was when she came into office, or in the post 9/11 era. It was, the emperor was talking about the nation that was suspected of helping Al Qaeda in order to carry out 9/11. And because of the lawsuit that came to light recently regarding the victims of 9/11 suing the Saudis, I'm assuming it is Saudi Arabia.
Probably.
But that was another gaffe that she got into trouble with. Her and her father were from the Niigata prefecture, and that's where the center of popularity was for her father at the time. And he actually, when he was prime minister, he supposedly drew in red ink on a map and said that's where the high-speed rail line should go from Niigata to Tokyo, and they actually just did that.
Oh, wow.
that he was known for pork barrel projects for Niigata, and so he was very popular there. And when she had to be fired by Koizumi, a whole bunch of people in Niigata were furious at this. And they were calling into the LDP and into Koizumi and saying, "Hey, this was wrong. You shouldn't have done this." And her popularity did not really wane.
No, it was at about 70% when she was fired, which rivaled Koizumi.
And Koizumi was furious about this situation because people were flooding the LDP with all these calls of support for her. And he went off on it and said that tears were a woman's most powerful weapon.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Not sure how smart that was.
No, but he was furious.
Oh, I can understand.
Tell. So yeah, this was a very interesting situation. She resigned / was fired in late January 2002. And then this movie comes out December 14th, 2002. Mm-hmm. So it's in the same year. But when we have that scene in the movie of the power being handed over from Kumi Mizuno's character of the prime minister going over to Akira Nakao's incoming prime minister, she gets the flowers and she gives him the flowers, and then there's the thing in the paper of the two of them. Mm-hmm. I couldn't help but think there was some sort of oblique reference to this scandal.
It wouldn't surprise me.
It was heavily in the news during the time that they were making this movie.
Yes.
But I thought, wow, that's funny that you include a scene like that in there and then have that in the newspaper on the screen for us. And it's almost like, well, the prime minister, or a foreign minister resigns or is fired. And when I saw all of this about Makiko Tanaka, I thought, I wonder if this movie's just touching on that subject.
It wouldn't surprise me.
It wasn't just blatantly obvious or anything. That would ruin it. But in this kind of case, it's almost like something Sekizawa would do.
It does seem like a very Sekizawan sort of thing to do.
Yeah, if he wanted to reference something without really referencing it, it's almost...
Yeah.
Now, after she got fired, she did still hang around for a while in politics. She was the Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology under the Democratic Party Prime Minister Noda. Prime Minister Noda, who was one of the few Democratic Party prime ministers that Japan has ever had. And she's also run as an independent, as well as in the Democratic Party. She went from LDP to independent to Democratic Party. And so she challenged authority no matter what, no matter where she was. So this is a very interesting figure, and I think that it's odd how this movie might very well be referencing that. I don't know if anybody else ever made this connection.
I'm going to say probably not. I think that was actually one of the first things that you mentioned to me when we were planning this podcast.
When I discovered that, I don't know how I discovered all of this about Makiko Tanaka, but then I thought, wait a minute, when was this? I thought, wow, I don't know if if this was a coincidence, it'd be a really funny one.
It'd be one heck of a coincidence.
Yeah. And it's also touching on the possibility that eventually maybe there will be a woman prime minister of Japan. Because there have been a couple of candidates that people have thought about over the years as to possibly be the one who gets to be the first female prime minister. As soon as that does happen, though, there's going to be so much pressure.
Oh yeah,
on that person because of the expectations and the pressure to do a good job.
All right, Brian, close us out with those economic figures.
Well, we are still in the extension of the lost decade, really here. In 2002, economic growth was 0.28%. And the total GDP of Japan fell from $4.15 trillion to $3.98 trillion.
Ouch.
And so it wasn't a very good year. The part of this was the impact of 9/11 and other economic issues that were global. But also Japan wasn't doing all that great economically at home either. It was just sort of more stagnation, if anything.
But the story of Kiryu doesn't end with this movie. Nope. The Kiryu Saga continues in our next episode with Godzilla Tokyo SOS. We get a few more familiar faces in this one.
Yes, it's the last of the Masaki Tezuka trilogy.
And the only instance of a direct sequel in the Millennium series.
Yes, we will enjoy that, and we hope to see you then.
If you'd like to get a hold of us and send us some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is feedback@kaijuvision.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook.
Our podcast is available on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, TuneIn, Podcast Addict, our YouTube channel, and on our website, kaijuvision.com. Thanks to Audiophiliac for creating our theme and bumper music. www.fiverr.com/audiophiliac. If you like our podcast, please support us on Patreon.
I'm Nathan Marchand, and I'm the podcast webmaster.
And I'm Brian Scherschel, and I edited this podcast. Sayonara.